Did you know that there are 14 mountain peaks over the height of 8,000 meters on planet Earth? 5 of them are in Pakistan, that includes K2, 6 of them are in Nepal, and of course that includes Everest, and 3 of them are in Tibet. Now, the first person to ascend and summit all 14 peaks was a man called Reinhard Messner, and it took him 16 years. In 2018, the record for climbing those 14 peaks was 7 years. Now, a 38-year-old Nepalese guy called Nirmal Purja, also known as Nims, decided that he was going to try and summit these 14 peaks, not in 7 years, but in 7 months, starting in April 2019. Nims had actually only got into mountaineering from 2012, so this meant when he decided to mount these 14 peaks, he'd only been mountaineering for 6 years. But Nims was actually a real man of stamina. He used to be a Gurkha, and he was the first Gurkha who got selected for the special boat service. But when he put his project out there in 2018, a lot of other mountaineers were very, very skeptical. But here's the key. Nims never lost sight of his goal, and he absolutely believed 100% that he would achieve it, so much so that he called his project Project Possible. In the run-up to his project, he did a lot of training, needless to say, and in particular, he was in London in 2018 being tested for his ability at 6,000 meters. His physiology was incredible, and his results were absolutely off the charts. So already going into this, he was a man of stamina, and it seemed to be that mountaineering came to him naturally. So he set off with his team of other Nepalese mountaineers in April of 2019. Phase 1 was to go through the Nepalese mountains first. Phase 2 was the Pakistan mountains, and Phase 3 was the China mountains. Now, he hadn't even been approved to go into Tibet and climb these mountains. He was still waiting for approval from the Chinese government. Anyway, he started off, and the first mountain he climbed was Annapurna. Now, Annapurna is a very formidable mountain, and it's prone to changing weather all throughout the day, all throughout the night. Nims and his team made it to the summit on the 24th of April 2019, but they'd had a really rough ride and really rough conditions, and when they got back down to base camp, they were exhausted. So they all slept through the night at the base camp, and in the morning they discovered that one of the mountaineers from another group hadn't actually come down the mountain, which meant they had spent the night out on the mountain in these perishing conditions. Now, Nims was so focused on his project and determined to achieve it within this 7-month window of opportunity, because obviously after October, the mountains were going to be too hazardous to climb because of the wintry conditions coming in. And so he really wanted to keep as much energy as possible to get him through his challenge. But he had a natural calling, learnt from his time in the Gurkha military, to always go back and never leave anybody behind. So he got 4 of his best men from his team, and they actually went back up to 7,500 meters to try and find this missing mountaineer. And of course, when they found him, he was almost dead, and they just had to really help him out, give him their oxygen, help him come down the mountain. But this was the spirit of Nims, was to go back, even though he was exhausted, and even though he'd only done 1 out of 14 mountains, but he stopped, he dropped everything and went back up to get that missing mountaineer. And that was really interesting. So with a totally clear conscience, Nims was able to continue and go on with his project to complete these other 13 mountains. The third mountain, Kanchenjunga, they actually summited relatively easily. Now, Nirmal was using oxygen over 8,000 meters. That was the rules of their project, is that they could use oxygen over 8,000 meters, which is also known as the dead zone. But it's heavy, so you try to minimize the amount of oxygen that you carry. And on the way back down from the summit of Kanchenjunga, they actually came across a mountaineer who was stuck and stranded and completely suffering from lack of oxygen and almost dying. And once again, Nims put his whole project to one side to try and save this mountaineer. And they spent several hours using their body warmth and using their own oxygen to help keep this mountaineer alive, who was completely suffering and really on the edge of death. And they were radioing to base camp to send up help. And they waited, but it seemed as if no help was coming. And eventually this mountaineer that Nims had stopped to save, eventually he died in their arms. And there was nothing they could do, and they were absolutely mortified. And in the process of trying to save this mountaineer, of course, they'd used up most of their oxygen. Now, as they were going down the mountain, Nims' team got ahead of him, and he slowly started to become a bit delusional, and he started to get H.A.C.E, which is high altitude cerebral edema, which means that your body is completely malfunctioning because of the lack of oxygen. And as he was coming down, he thought he saw this huge Yeti monster. Because of Nims' incredible stamina and focus on his dream, he knew he had to keep control, and he knew that he was hallucinating because of the condition of his body, and he just started shouting at this monster. And it turned out, as he got closer to this monster, that it was actually another mountaineer who was also suffering from H.A.C.E. And so Nims, even in spite of his H.A.C.E, was able to navigate the two of them back down the mountain very carefully to base camp. This is the kind of person that Nims was. He would drop everything to go out and help another mountaineer ahead of his project that he'd been focusing on for so many years. He went on to finish climbing all the mountain peaks in Nepal, and then he went on to Pakistan and summited also the 5 peaks in Pakistan, helped hundreds of people going up K2, which is one of the most difficult mountains to climb, and he actually went ahead of a lot of mountaineers who'd given up the previous day and relayed the tracks so that they could follow. So he finally finished all the peaks in Pakistan, and next was Tibet. Now, during the course of climbing the peaks in Pakistan, he got the news that the Chinese government wasn't prepared to give him approval to climb the Tibetan mountains. And so he was just devastated that he wasn't going to be able to complete his project, but he never stopped believing, and he focused on his belief. For you or me, if you get a no from the Chinese government, well, you think, well, that's it. I'm not going to go back and say, please, please, please. But Nims, absolutely full of belief in his project, didn't give up. And he got all his friends, and he got all his contacts, and he got all the people who were supporting him on his project, which has now become quite famous in the mountaineering community. And also, when he summited Everest, he'd actually taken a photograph of the traffic jam on the top of Mount Everest that went viral on the internet. So he was getting a lot of support, and he basically said to everybody, please write a letter of petition to the Chinese government to give me permission to climb these 3 mountains in Tibet before the winter comes. And amazingly, the Chinese government turned around and said, okay, we'll give you approval to climb those mountains. So come hell or high water, he made it. He achieved his project and completed the 14 mountain peaks. And in fact, when they interviewed him at the end of his incredible journey, Project Possible, he actually said the easy part was climbing the mountains. There were so many other things, logistical issues that he'd found so much more difficult to surmount, not least the Chinese government. Now, what's really key for me was the power of Nims' belief. Because he believed 100% in his heart and in his mind, he was able to drive himself, give himself the motivation to make it happen. But not only that, not only did he have the motivation, he also attracted opportunities from the universe. For example, the photo of Everest that went viral that gave him a total tailwind of supporters, and the fact that the Chinese government was persuaded to give him permission. So this was a combination of him being motivated because of his own belief and the universe assisting him. And that is the power of the law of attraction. But here's one more thing. When Nims gets to the pearly gates of heaven, what do you think the angels will remember him for?